welcome to eConnections. I'm your host, Stephen Smoke, and this week we'll be speaking with Lucas Meers of the Okapi Conservation Project. We'll be discussing the Okapi Conservation Project's background and inside details, as well as how Lucas got into the conservation field. We'll also discuss his personal development and most memorable moments in conservation. All right, Lucas, tell us who you are and what your role is in the Okapi Conservation Project.
My name is Lucas Meers, and I am the program officer for the Okapi Conservation Project, which protects the endangered Okapi in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Awesome. So when was it founded? Who founded it? What's some of the history of this project and the park itself?
The Okapi Conservation Project has a very storied history, and we go back about 37 years. We were founded in 1987 by primarily by a group of three gentlemen: John Lucas, who is the current president of Okapi Conservation Project; Jean Lamba, who is a Congolese national; and Carl Roof, who was a Swiss dairy farmer. Who worked for President Mobutu at the time of Zaire. And then also a key player in the success of the project in the start was Carl's wife, Rosie, who's still with our project and runs our project as our in-country director.
Awesome. So if we had to put a box around the organization to classify it, I tentatively said that it was a local and regional organization working with the Okapi and the surrounding ecosystem, focusing on conservation of the Okapi, education of the folks near and around it, as well as the sustainable habits of the people surrounding the forest. Would that be an appropriate box, or would you have additional sections?
That is an appropriate box as it stands today. But when we were originally founded, we were brought in to help rehabilitate the old Belgian outpost in Apulu, the town of Apulu, Epulu, inside the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. The reserve didn't exist at that time in 1987. We helped create the reserve, which started in 1992. But we were brought in to help renovate and rehabilitate the old Belgian outpost, take care of the Okapi, and actually export Okapi to zoos across the world. And when we originally started, that was the original intent of the project. So we exported 3 Okapi to help increase the genetic diversity of Okapi in human care, because they were struggling with inbreeding, and so they needed new genetic material from the wild population, new founders. But over time, that kind of became a secondary role, and we've evolved into a conservation program that works to support and protect the entire Okapi Wildlife Reserve and support and provide needs to the communities that live in this area, because it's a very impoverished area of the world. So we help improve people's livelihoods while also protecting the forest, and that's what we've kind of evolved into.
That's really interesting bit of history there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I assume that based on the cessation of the export, that the populations in human care are doing well. I know that I've seen articles while doing the background reading about new calves being born in the US as well as in Europe. So I assume that that population is still doing well.
Yes, overall, the Okapi population in human care is doing pretty well. I think the ideal situation would to have new genetic material brought in. I don't know what that looks like in the future, but for now, I think there's about 200 Okapi in human care right now between the US, Europe, and a few other facilities around the world. And it's relatively stable. They are having a lot more males being born lately, I've noticed. So we need some additional females being born to help with that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been saying Okapi, we've been talking about it. What is an Okapi? I know they're relatives of the giraffe. They, from the back end, they look like a zebra. What are they? How would you describe them?
My opening line to everyone when I describe Okapi is, it's the coolest animal you've never heard of. It is the closest living relative to the giraffe, and you can tell this by they have a very similarly shaped skull. They have a very long tongue like a giraffe. It's 18 to 20 inches long. It is dark. It's like a dark blue color. Okapi have ossicones. Male Okapi have ossicones. They're horn, bony-like protrusions from their skull that are covered in skin and fur. On giraffes, the males and females have ossicones, but in Okapi, only males have ossicones. And they also walk the same. So if you look closely when a giraffe walks, they move both legs on the right side of their body at the same time, and then both legs on the left side of their body at the same time. It's that I forget what kind of gait it's called, but instead of moving the front left and the back right foot at the same time, and the front right and the back left foot at the same time, they move both legs on the same side of their body at the same time when they're walking. So giraffe Okapi both walk in that similar fashion. They
Interesting.
are not related to zebras. I mean, if you go far enough back in evolution, yes, you could argue that. But I always tell people tigers have stripes, but they're not related to zebras. So that's kind of my argument. But I always tell people that have never seen an okapi that they look like a chocolate brown horse with white stripes on its butt.
Interesting. That's pretty cool. So, where generally are they found? We talked about in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in the rainforest. Is there like a very specific type of rainforest that they
Mhm.
prefer, like lowland, highland, kind of medium?
Okapi tend to favor just dense forests. They really like new growth. They like they're herbivores. They feed on plants and they nibble on plants as they walk through the forest. They'll take a little nibble on this plant, a little nibble on that plant. We did some research years ago and we documented they fed on over 100 different species of plants. I'm sure it's more than that. But they tend to favor new growth. But where they live, it's in closed canopy forests where very little light reaches the ground. They're only found in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are some historic evidence of them being in the Similiki forest of western Uganda, but that was last documented in 1880, and they haven't been seen in that region or documented in that region since then. So at this point, they're only found in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's kind of become a cultural symbol of the country and a symbol of conservation for the country because it's only found there, and it's there's a little bit of ownership with the Congolese people with Okapi.
Okay, so what I guess then is driving their endangered status? Obviously, there's a limit to the amount of forest and habitat available. They also are poaching targets, if I understand
Mhm,
correctly.
mhm. Yes. So the main threat to Okapi is loss of habitat. And the main threat to loss of habitat is slash and burn agriculture. And so that's when communities will cut down a section of forest, they'll burn everything, they'll plant their crops, but those crops take up all the nutrients. And then each growing season, they do the same. They'll cut down additional trees, burn it, plant their crops, cut down more trees, plant it, burn it, plant their crops. And that's slowly encroaching into Okapi habitat. There's also mining for gold and diamonds and coltan with the not resurgence, the exponential growth of electronics and electric cars and cell phones and computers. Coltan is a metal that's used in a lot of those batteries, and so there's a need to mine coltan. There's a little bit of deforestation through logging, and so it's mainly the loss of habitat is the main threat to Okapi that's causing a huge devastation of the Central African rainforests. A secondary threat is they are becoming now a target for poaching. And this is a recent thing that we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years, how they are targeted for their skin, bones, and their fat for various reasons. And we are helping a local NGO called Conserve Congo on some of the investigations into that and to see kind of where these are going to look for more information and find the people that are doing the poaching. But I can't speak in too much detail on that.
Obviously.
Yes.
So, one of the interesting things about Okapi is that their patterns are unique to the
Hmm.
point that if
Correct.
you have images of them on a trail camera, you can tell if it's Okapi 1, Okapi 2, Okapi 3, provided you get a good enough picture. Is that ideable even after poaching? Like if you could take a picture of the pelt, would you be able to cross-reference that back to potentially field cameras?
Mhm. In theory, yes. In theory, yes. The thing is, we would have to have
Good
images of those
pictures.
Okapi to begin with, yes. And so the stripes are individually unique, just like our fingerprint, just like a tiger stripes, just like a zebra stripes, although they're not related to zebras, a giraffe's reticulated pattern. They're all individually unique. And what's interesting with Okapi is you would be able, in theory, to identify the individual if you had their skin with the stripes on it. But on either side of their haunches or their butt, the stripe pattern is slightly different. So we would have to have an image of both sides to be able to identify the animal. And usually the animal is walking one direction in front of the camera. So we only have photos of one side of them.
Interesting. Okay, I hadn't thought about that.
Yep.
So again, while I was looking up what on earth an okapi was, I found some information about them doing infrasound communication. Like I assume
Hmm.
elephants is kind of the big one where they're able to hit such a low frequency that it travels through the ground rather than the air
Hmm.
and communicate that way. How well is that documented?
So that was only really discovered. So Okapi can communicate through infrasound, and that was really only discovered in while they were in human care with researchers from Dallas Zoo, White Oak Conservation Center, and San Diego Zoo. The three institutions were working together, and they realized that Okapi do communicate through infrasound, just like elephants, rhinos, giraffes also do it as well. And so we're learning that that's how they communicate with their offspring, their calves, because an okapi is a prey species, and so they are preyed on by leopards, are their main predator. So their entire evolution, their entire biology is centered around avoiding detection from leopards. And one of the ways that they communicate is through infrasound, below human hearing, below the leopard's sense of sound, below what they can hear, so that they're able to communicate to each other without being detected.
Sounds like a pretty good plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is really kind of at the forefront of knowledge and identification. So
Mhm.
this would be very much kind of a leap in logic, but would you be able to kind of ID them from unique call patterns, kind of like we do with whale song or dolphin song? Is that
I would
something that would be a future expansion of that?
I imagine at some point, especially with the how quickly technology is advancing, that we would be able to detect individuals by their infrasound. I don't think we can do it yet, or we don't have enough recordings of their infrasound to be able to look to see if we can do it yet. But I imagine at some point we would be able to detect individuals, or using infrasound detection to at least get an idea of the number of animals in an area, because I know that they are using infrasound to detect or to estimate forest elephant populations in the rainforest. I imagine we would be able to do the same with Okapi, at least to get an idea of number of animals. But I'm sure technology will advance at some point that we would be able to detect individuals.
That sounds super interesting. So we've got Okapi, they're in the DRC, and they are primarily on in the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. How big is that? What is it set aside as? Because we have like national parks in the US. Is it similar or is it different? Walk me through the reserve.
Absolutely. So the Okapi Wildlife Reserve was created in 1992 with the community and indigenous peoples in mind. So often, when you create a national park, whatever you decide that parcel of land is to be, all humans need to be removed from that area, which is quite controversial with local communities because they see themselves as not valued. But when we created the reserve, we specifically had the communities in mind. So there's specific areas where they are allowed to go about and live their daily lives, practice agriculture. For the indigenous Mbuti and Efe peoples, they have specific hunting zones that they're still allowed to hunt certain species to maintain their traditional lifestyles. And so human activities are allowed inside of the reserve. There are areas set aside inside of the reserve that no human activities are allowed, essentially like a mini national park, but there were never any people there to begin with. But people are allowed to farm, sustenance farming and sustenance hunting, as long as the food and everything stays local. And so there's specific areas where they're allowed to do it. There's boundaries, and these boundaries were community chosen. The communities
Okay.
chose these boundaries the agricultural boundaries and the hunting zones, because that's what they felt they needed, the space that they needed. And then we went in after to help facilitate and implement some rules on what animals you can hunt, what animals you can't hunt, and we do a lot of education and hunting seasons and sort of that sort of thing on the education front.
Okay, that sounds very interesting and like something that would be an interesting method to
Hmm.
apply elsewhere, especially
Yeah,
when you are setting aside large areas that
yeah.
have communities on or within them.
Absolutely. Normally, when you hear the term reserve, there is a level of human involvement, and humans do live inside of that space. But when you have a national park, humans are not allowed to live inside those boundaries. I also want to say that the Okapi Wildlife Reserve is relatively large too. It is just under 14,000 square kilometers. It's slightly smaller than the state of Connecticut, if that gives you any context of how big it is. I know American geography. If you have a lot of American listeners, they might not know how big Connecticut is or what kilometers are. But it's just shy of 14,000 kilometers, which is just a little bit smaller than the state of Connecticut.
Okay, so large has people living in
Mhm.
it. What other species are within the reserve that you are tangentially helping
Mhm.
conserve by having that space set aside?
Yes. I love that you said tangentially conserving because our main focus is Okapi as an umbrella species. And so and our message is by protecting Okapi, you're protecting all of these other species that share its rainforest home. Some major species that we love to see in the forest are forest elephants, which are critically endangered. Their populations are declining drastically and dramatically. And IUCN just recognized them as a separate species from the African savanna elephant, which then classified them as critically endangered. They have a few different features that when I see a photo of an elephant, I can immediately tell if it's a savanna elephant or a forest elephant. So we have forest elephants throughout the reserve. We have a huge population of chimpanzees. On our camera traps, we always get massive troops of chimpanzees with their babies. I love it. It's wonderful. We have, well, in addition to chimpanzees, we have a total of, I think, 17 species of primates. It's the highest density of primates anywhere in the continent of Africa.
Wow.
We also have bongo. We have Western bongo, which are a gorgeous species. They're a copper colored, with some copper color with thin white stripes, and they have massive horns. And the males get a little bit of rusty red color on their chest when they turn into adults. There's over 900 species of butterflies. There's a ton of species of birds. It's one of the most biodiverse areas on the entire continent of Africa. Congo itself, Democratic Republic of Congo, is the second most biodiverse country in Africa. And the only other country that outpaces Congo is South Africa because they have an insane amount of diversity of plants, but we have a higher diversity of animal species.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's awesome to hear that there's so much wildlife being protected by this,
Mhm.
by the Okapi conservation work. So, as I noticed when I looked up the reserve on Google Earth, there's a big old, I guess, large highway that kind of
Mhm.
cuts through the reserve. I assume that that was, I mean, obviously already there when the reserve was
Mhm.
being set aside. How does that affect the conservation work? Does it give better access? Does it impede?
I love the question about the highway because that was such a critical component in the creation of the reserve. And for that, I have to give a little bit of history. So, Route
Go for it.
Nationale 4, NR4 or RN4, bisects it cuts the reserve into thirds. So it's the lower one third and the upper two thirds is where the highway goes through. And it essentially bisects the entire continent of Africa. So it's a main thoroughfare of traffic. A lot of goods are going back and forth between the reserve. The reserve boundaries close at sunset and reopen at sunrise. So once you enter the reserve, if you enter the reserve before 6 p.m. and you're still in the reserve and it closes, you have to overnight. Normally in Apulu, which is kind of like the main town. So it brings some business to the small hotels in Apulu, and then you won't be able to leave the reserve until 6 a.m. the next day. So there is a little bit of a protection that closes down 6 p.m. at night and opens at 6 a.m. And when the country of Belgium colonized the country of the Belgian Congo at the time, and then it was Zaire, and then now it's Democratic Republic of Congo. When they colonized the country, they moved all of the people to the main roads. So there's N4 that goes across the reserve, and then there's another road that goes up to along the eastern border of the reserve. And so they moved all of the people to the reserve or the road, and in a way that was kind of a good thing looking at it now, because that essentially protected the forest from any use. And so all of the communities, anyone that lives inside of the reserve lives along those roads. They don't live in the forest, with the exception of the indigenous Nguti and FA peoples. They do have nomadic camps that move around different areas around the reserve, so they don't put too much pressure on any specific area. But the highway was a major reason that the reserve has been so successful and the protected areas inside the reserve being protected is because all of the people have moved to live along the road because it's more of an access point.
Oh, that's
I will add to that that the road is a dirt road. And so
right.
there are 2 rainy seasons. And so the road conditions are horrific. And really, I do not understand how these massive tractor trailers or semi trucks are able to make their way across the country. It takes weeks to get anywhere. And so we travel primarily via motorbike because we can circumvent all of the potholes or whatever you want to call them, the ditches.
Right.
Some of the ditches are so deep that they swallow cars, and we have some photos and videos of the road the ditch being so deep and so wide that you could walk across the top of a tractor trailer. That's how deep it is.
Wow.
Um, it's it's insane how people are able to survive and live in these horrible road conditions, but that's why we travel via motorbike everywhere. All of our educators or all of our agroforestry staff. It's kind of incredible that we've been able to accomplish so much in
In that
37
sort of
years.
condition. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really amazing and an interesting look at the differences between what we consider a highway and what is obviously a well
exactly.
used and I would
Yeah.
assume beloved road since everyone has to
Mhm.
use it.
Yeah.
Uh,
What would normally take us, if we're traveling from our Apulu site to our Mombasa site, which is just east of Apulu, it takes about a 2 hour drive. What would normally take 15 minutes in the United States on our road, it's a 2 hour drive to get, and it's not a comfortable drive either.
Right. So you mentioned the agroforestry and the education. I want to dive into some of these projects because having
Mhm.
looked into them, there's all sorts of stuff that you work with or people that you work with and projects that the OCP is always doing.
Mhm.
Which one of those or which two of those are you most proud of?
Sure. So I guess I'll take a step back or a step higher, a broader view of that question. And so
Okay.
we focus on 3 pillars: wildlife protection, community assistance, and conservation education and awareness. Community assistance is probably our biggest pillar because we're working in such an area of need. The people need so much. It's one of the most impoverished areas of the world. And so we focus on improving the livelihoods of the communities so that we can open up a conversation and a dialogue about protecting wildlife. Because when you're trying to feed your family or even protect your family, provide for your family, whether it's healthcare or food or water, you're not thinking about protecting the wildlife that's around you. And so by helping improve people's livelihoods, empower them to improve their own livelihoods, that is opening up a dialogue and a conversation to talk about conservation and ways to live more sustainably and also benefit yourself. And so I think one of the programs that I'm most proud of, and probably our longest running program that has a direct connection to Okapi, is our agroforestry program. And that provides tools, seeds, capacity building training for all of these farmers located in and around the reserve, inside and outside of the reserve, because we have programs that extend outside of the reserve to grow their own food in a sustainable manner. So I said one of the major threats to Okapi was slash and burn farming, where people cut down trees, they burn it, and then they plant, they cut down, burn, plant. with simple techniques like crop rotation and using nitrogen fixing plants like beans and other nitrogen fixing plants, you can lengthen the life of the soil so that you can still grow crops on the same plot of land. You just alternate different plots of land. It's a simple technique that's widespread across agriculture in the United States and Europe. But it's not only increasing their crop yields, but they're also allowed to stay on the same plot of land. They're extending less energy. They don't have to go further and further into the forest away from their home. It can often be dangerous in the forest. You could encounter dangerous animals. You could encounter insecurity issues. And so by staying close to their land, close to their home, we're not only increasing their crop yields, lengthening the life of their soil so they don't have to extend as much energy, but we're also reducing encroachment into Okapi habitat, thereby protecting Okapi because Okapi can survive. The best way to protect Okapi is to leave it alone. And by just providing the habitat for Okapi, just allowing it to live its life in existing habitat, it will be fine. So I would say agroforestry is one of the ones that I'm most proud of. And also our conservation education program, which includes our women's groups, our women empowerment program, but all of our work with our schools, all of the local chiefs and the government authorities, and the ICCN eco guards, which patrol the forest to remove snares, arrest poachers, remove miners. They're tasked with protecting the reserve and doing patrols. But all of our education programs that educate the community, all the government authorities, chiefs, all about ways that we can work together to protect Okapi and their habitat, and why protecting Okapi and their habitat can benefit ourselves. And so I think our education program does a fantastic job. We work with over 500 schools in the region. I don't know how we do it with a team of 11, but they make it happen. And we also record radio programs because there's not much technology in these very remote areas. Very few people have televisions, but everyone has a radio. And so that's one of the most effective means of communication on all of these programs, talking about agroforestry or talking about why women are a critical component to any conservation program, why we should protect Okapi, what is an ICCN Eco Guard, why was the Okapi Wildlife Reserve created. All of these different topics on radio broadcasts are disseminated throughout the region, reaching, I don't know, 400, 500,000 people on a regular basis. So the accomplishments of our education team are widespread. So I would say my two programs that I'm most proud of are agroforestry and education.
So for the listeners, the agroforestry program won the Disney Conservation Hero
Yes.
Award
Mhm.
in 2021 or 2022.
20 We won it in 2020, but
2020.
we weren't able to give them the award until 2021.
Okay.
And so, or maybe in 2022. COVID has messed with my time.
Right.
I know we got maybe okay, we got the award in 2021 for the work in 2020, but we
Okay.
weren't able to give it the award to them until 2022. So Disney Conservation Fund announces these awards to conservation heroes that have accomplished a great deal or something significant over the previous year. And when COVID hit, that was it was huge. It was a huge impact across the world, even these remote areas where we didn't even really see COVID. But the Congolese government shut down everything. We weren't allowed to have meetings of more than 10 people. Everyone had to be masked, like everywhere across the world. But a lot of our movement and education programs were restricted. But we have such a close relationship with the community through our agroforestry program and meeting with everyone, training everyone, distributing food. Our agroforestry team was able to adapt to all of these restrictions to ensure that the farmers still received training and were empowered and tools and seeds to grow their own food to feed their families through the pandemic. And so Disney awarded us that award. Not me, but
The
our agroforestry
agroforestry
team that
program.
award. Yes, I don't deserve that award. The agroforestry team that award for accomplishing all of that in 2021. And so Disney gave us, and there's no mail service over there. So we had to wait until one of our staff in the U.S. went over the next time to bring the medals, the shirts, all the certificate, a cash prize for all of our staff. So they were very excited and very proud of themselves for accomplishing that.
That's awesome. And so you have 6 nurseries where you head start some of the
Mhm.
plants or trees,
Correct. Yes.
and then those are provided free of charge to the
Mhm.
local
Correct.
farming
Correct.
community?
Yes. So we have 6 agroforestry sites located inside and outside of the reserve, and where we do head start all of these tree seedlings and different species of trees grow in different areas. So not all of the nurseries grow the same trees, because there's different altitudes and different temperature variations and rainfall and all that stuff. And there's certain trees that would be better in certain areas. And each tree seedling serves a different purpose. We may be growing some trees for timber use because people use a very specific species of tree to make their stick in mud huts. That's the primary house building material in the region.
Right.
So there's timber trees. There's also fruit and nut trees. There are nitrogen fixing trees, which they plant in their gardens. So they'll alternate row cropping. And then there's also native trees, primary forest trees that we'll plant for reforestation areas. If we're reforesting a plot of land, we'll plant those native species of trees there. But each tree has a different purpose and a different need. And so people can come get those trees for free, as long as they agree to not participate in any illegal activities like gold mining or poaching specific species. So in order to join our program, receive seeds, receive trees, receive tools, and the training, you have to sign an agreement saying that you won't participate in those harmful activities.
How have you all seen that grow? Do you see the same farmers every year? Like, do you see the ones that have been doing it for a couple of years bring their buddies? Like, how does that,
Mhm.
like, how have you measured that sort of growth and sustainability of the program?
A little combination of both. And I think we need to develop a plan for sustainability, because obviously we're giving away free trees. So people will come back all the time. And so we do see regular farmers that are coming back more and more. And we will support farmers multiple years in a row, particularly if there's a bad season. Because
Right.
with climate change, we're seeing a shift in rainfall and the dry seasons, extension of dry seasons. So not everything is surviving as well as it did before. And so we'll provide supplemental seeds or additional trees for farmers that may have lost their entire crop. But we do see a lot of new people joining the program as well. And our structure or our vision in the future is to expand into new areas of the reserve and outside of the reserve so that we can reach new towns and communities, because people aren't able to travel as far, because many people don't have any vehicles, they travel by foot. And so if
Right.
you live far away from one of our 6 sites, you can't necessarily participate in our program. Plus, if you did have a vehicle, it would be difficult to travel on the
Right.
road conditions. We will deliver some trees to a certain distance away from the sites, but that's a additional pressure and additional cost on us that we can't really eat at this point.
Right.
But we are looking to set up new, and we have our sights set on 2 additional villages to bring it up to 8 nurseries in the next 5 or so years, so that we can reach more people. Last year, we reached a goal of 100,000 trees distributed and planted, 108,000, a little over 108,000. And that was the most trees that we've ever planted in a single year. The previous record was like 86,000. So we
Congratulations.
are, thank
Like,
you.
obviously, I'm saying it to you, but congratulations to that
Yes,
team.
congratulations to the team. Yes. Yes, we had an end of year fundraising campaign where we had a donor match funds in 2022, raise $100,000, plant 100,000 trees. So that was our goal. That was our task. And so we raised a little over $100,000, and we planted more than 100,000 trees.
Yeah. So one of the programs that I've found most interesting was the women's empowerment and
Uh huh.
education side. During COVID, a lot of the women shifted their sewing and production and clothing production over to doing
Hmm.
masks for additional
Hmm.
income. How like I know that you all have developed these centers for them to work outside of the rain or
Hmm.
in inclement weather.
Yep.
How does that occur? How did that program kind of develop?
Hmm. So our women's empowerment initiative, kind of evolved from an idea from Rosie Roof, who's our in-country director, in
Hmm.
about 2004. So these are existing women's groups that are meeting on a regular basis, and so we identify them, and we make an offer to support them with training, funds to get materials, and we'll often we're trying to do more. We have built 2 women's centers where they can meet during inclement weather, because they will meet once or twice a week,
Hmm.
and they will do sewing, knitting, embroidery, whichever they're interested in doing. And then there's also a gardening component. So there is a little bit of a collaboration with our agroforestry staff,
Okay.
where they will learn how to grow specific different the agricultural techniques, but also grow specific species of plants because we have experimental gardens in all of these sites to show which plants will grow well, and it also improves the diversity of their diet. They have a very limited diet in this area, and so by planting different species of peppers or tomatoes or eggplants or cabbages or whatever it is, it helps diversify their diets, diversity of nutrients, and
Right.
it ultimately leads to a healthier lifestyle. That's the background intent. And so these women's groups, they will do sewing, embroidery, knitting, and will hire teachers that will come in and give them lessons. We provide them with sewing machines, fabric, tools, or not tools, I guess, yes, tools, but irons and all of that stuff so that they can
Right.
make their items to sell in the local markets or to make them for their families too. Everyone, all private or all schools are private there. So you have to have a uniform in order to attend school. And if you don't have a uniform, you cannot attend school. So these women also make uniforms for children so that they can attend school, where they're exposed to our education programs
Right.
about protecting Okapi in the forest.
So it all ties
So
back in.
it's all kind of tied in. So that is, I think we need a little bit of more structure to the women's group program on how can we have the women graduate from the program so we can accept new women, so that we need to start thinking about the next steps in evolution of the
Mhm.
program. But I think overall it's a wonderful program. The women make a lot of incredible shirts. I have several myself.
I
um,
I saw a
and
picture of one and I went, "Man, I need one of those shirts."
they are
They're
very
they're
popular. um,
awesome.
we we have long term goals of trying to sell them.
Mm,
There are several hurdles with that. One is a quality control. I think we need to work on making sure that they're of the caliber that we could sell in the United States or anywhere else in the world. Two is getting them out of the country because we
right.
can't ship them out of the country. We have to bring them out of the country, which is quite costly. And they're also heavy because they're a really, really thick, heavy cotton fabric, and they're that wax covered fabric. So
Right.
they're heavy and they're thick. Also, size limitations.
Right.
We're trying to figure out how to standardize sizes and how much could we sell them for. We don't know. So there's a
So
lot of stuff to.
So you're
It's a
saying in
lot of
10
challenges.
years, I might be able to buy
Yes,
one
yes.
at an auction benefiting the Okapi Conservation
Yes, yes,
Project. Okay.
exactly,
All right.
exactly.
So we covered some of those projects that you're most proud of. If you had to pick one that was needing the biggest boost, where would you
Mhm.
identify that? Or what would you
I
identify that as?
I would love to do a lot more monitoring. We do have a very low key camera trap study just to determine presence absence of Okapi in specific areas of the reserve, but we really don't have a good idea of how many Okapi are out there. We have a general idea from ICCN, EcoGuards, and the Wildlife Conservation Society researchers doing transect fecal counts in the reserve. And so you can get an estimate of that, but I don't know how reliable that is. And we have no way of knowing what is outside of the reserve. It's much too dangerous. It's too insecure. It's very risky to go out into the forest outside of a protected area. And so there hasn't really been any attempts to do camera trap studies outside of the reserve. We were working with another NGO that wanted to do a range wide camera trap survey, but just the security became too much of an issue and we couldn't implement it. So then we had to take a redirection on the grant. But at some point, we do hope that security will return or at least get to the point where we can do an extensive range wide research or
Right.
understanding of the census, or even just additional research on Okapi. That's a significant gap. There's not much research out there,
Yeah. I
particularly
mean,
on wild Okapi.
they're very reclusive. They're even
Hmm.
in the best of times, they're difficult to spot, even if they're
Yep.
standing in front of you. So you mentioned kind of the security issues and earlier maybe some political instability. What kind of how does that set back the Okapi conservation
Hmm.
project? I know that that's something that you've talked about in length outside of the
Hmm.
podcast, but I'd like to make sure that people are aware that the folks that are doing this job are really in a situation sometimes.
Hmm. Yes, exactly. I think I think all of our staff have been in situations sometimes. Our number one concern and the number one hurdle for us really is security on implementing our programs on the ground. There are over 120 known armed rebel groups in and around Eastern DRC, Eastern DR Congo. And so it's always a risk when you're traveling, whenever you are particularly on the roads and the poor roads, and they create opportunities for ambush attacks. So we're very sensitive to where we're traveling, where our staff going. On our weekly staff update calls, the first thing on the agenda is the security situation. What's the security situation? Where can we travel? Where can we not travel? Do we need to fly there? Is it even too dangerous to fly there? What were the recent attacks? That's the number one call on our staff calls every week. We are fortunate that we do have all of the ICC and eco guards inside the reserve. We're kind of in our own little security bubble, where we haven't really had any attacks in a couple of years. And so we are safe. We deem ourselves safe in the reserve. We have support from the ICC Eco Guards. They provide our protection for all of our staff. We also have the FAR DC, the DR Congo Army is also
In the
present
region.
nearby
Right.
in the region. And so they help deter some of the rebel groups from advancing toward us. But yeah, security is a huge situation. We will travel on motorbikes very closely to the reserve or inside the reserve. But if we're traveling to the reserve from outside, we always fly. We have to get all of our supplies in Bunia or Butembo or Beni, which are three population centers to the east. But to get there, you're traveling through armed group territory. And so we have to charter flights. We do have an airstrip that we built in 1994 in the reserve. That was probably one of the best decisions our staff ever did for the reserve,
Right.
because of the situation that we're in now. It's pretty much our only access point when the roads are closed. So we have to fly everywhere to get all of our materials, and that dramatically increases our budget. So we try and time it and share flights as best as we can with other NGOs in the region. But it's a part of our daily operations, our daily calls. It's I get Google alerts on everything. I'm always asking about our security situation. It's it's a lot.
Yeah. And I know that the connections that the org has developed with the local communities really do help you
Mhm.
maintain the level of security that you are able to maintain.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's probably the our best accomplishment over our 37 years is the trust that we've developed with all of the communities.
Right.
And that has benefited us tremendously, all of our staff in safety. We've been in the region for 37 years. The reserve itself has been attacked several times. In 2012, we suffered the most horrific attack that made international headlines, where that killed all 14 Okapi, several staff members, several people were kidnapped. All of the buildings were looted and burned. We pretty much lost everything. That is probably the most well-known attack, but we have now since grown and recovered from that. It's crazy to think that was 12 years ago,
Yeah.
but we security is a major concern, but because we've developed these trusted relationships with the communities know what's happening, and they know when new people enter an area. If you're not recognized, the communities are small enough that they know everyone. And if a stranger enters, it sends up a red flag. And
Right.
so we're immediately notified, regardless of who it is. And so they kind of give us the lowdown and tell us what's going on. And news travels quickly. News travels very quickly, and it's critical that it does. So if we're about to leave for an expedition or go get supplies,
Right.
and we're notified of that, we'll have to reroute or circumvent or figure out another way to
Okay. Yeah. That sounds super reasonable. Uh
go.
yeah, I security is
It's
an
it's
ongoing
quite a
battle.
yes, it's an ongoing battle, and it's a difficult topic to talk about.
Right.
And it's something that most people are not familiar with, and often people don't know how to respond to
Mhm.
these types of situations, or when I talk about it. And it's interesting to talk about it in a matter of fact but respectful and just manner when you're talking about these communities' lives who are at stake and who have endured a lot of these issues and attacks. And we have some of our staff that's all they know is life in a politically unstable area, because it's been
Right.
going on since 1997. And so it's an interesting topic and theme to talk about with people that aren't familiar with the region, because it's it's a difficult thing to react to and
Right.
understand.
Well, and one of the things that has struck me as I did some of the background research on the Okapi conservation is the medical care for the families of
Mhm,
the deceased eco
mhm,
guards that have been lost in
mhm,
the line of duty, effectively just continuing that support that they got. And even in the most recent report that you all put out, you have at the end a remembrance for the people that lost their lives,
mhm,
right, as this project has
mhm.
grown. And that's something that
Exactly.
is different, like is just
Yes.
very starkly different than a lot of
Yes.
organizations.
Yes, a lot. So we take a very holistic approach to a conservation because we firmly believe that conservation is about the people and not the animals. Because often people, whether intentional or not, are often the cause of loss of habitat or whatever it may be. They may not know that they are the cause or that they're having such an impact on their surrounding forest or ecosystem, but they're just trying to provide for their families. And so we try and provide a way to improve their livelihoods, communicating with them, working for them, asking them what they need to improve their livelihoods so that they're open to a conversation about conserving wildlife and wild places and how it relates to them. So our healthcare goes a little bit deeper than just providing the needs for the families of the fallen rangers. We provide healthcare for all of the ICC and eco guards in the reserve and their families, all of the Wildlife Conservation Society staff, and their families, and all of our Okapi Conservation Project staff and families, and the indigenous people that live in the region. We don't provide it for the communities because there are other healthcare centers and health facilities, and there's a local hospital that they go to. But we have a very basic clinic that treats minor injuries, medications, illnesses for all of the rangers and reserve staff and their families, so that they're healthy and able to continue on patrol protecting the forest. And we want to make sure that if a ranger is on patrol in the forest for 20 days at a time, he feels safe and comfortable, or she feels safe and comfortable that their family is taken care of and is healthy while they're gone, because there's really not any communication during those 20
Right.
days. If there are rangers or OCP staff members that do lose their lives in the line of duty, we will cover the additional housing and food and school costs for their partner and all of their children. So we'll cover their school costs until they graduate high school, because education is a key component to understanding the world around you and
Right.
understanding what you can do and what impact you can make. And by ensuring that these children, regardless of what age they are when their um, father or mother passes, um, we want to make sure that they're in school until they graduate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, pivoting off of some of the slightly less comfortable, darker subjects,
Yes.
and towards what opportunities would be available for say a listener wants to get involved with the copy conservation project or a
Mhm,
similar organization, what might be available to a listener?
mhm. So the number one request that we have is that doesn't cost anything, is for people to just talk about Okapi. I said we have several hurdles in country that we're addressing, but we also have a major hurdle globally, that people don't know what an okapi is. And
Right.
that's where I get my line, it's the coolest animal you've never heard of. We need people to talk about okapi and teach people that they are their own unique animal. They're not a hybrid, they're not a mix of animals. They are their own unique animal. They're often called the forest giraffe. We always joke with our giraffe conservation friends that the okapi is called the forest giraffe, but technically, evolutionarily speaking, the okapi is much older than a giraffe. So we should call giraffes savanna okapi. It's an internal inside joke with,
Uh-huh.
with giraffe people. But
Yeah.
we always ask that people can talk about okapi and just share with, because people aren't going to protect or contribute or want to protect anything that they don't know about, something they don't know about. So one is just talk about okapi. Two, financial support of any capacity, of any capacity. I think a US dollar goes a long way in Congo, and supporting our programs. We have an expert staff, a fantastic staff that know how to implement the programs. Our limitation is funding and just time. And so funding our organization, supporting our organization in any capacity, whether it's we've had children do lemonade stands or selling things just to raise money for Okapi. It's always an exciting time to get, particularly the younger generation, to get involved and really feel like they're connected. Um, we don't have any opportunities on site in Congo due to
for
security issues
reasons, right?
for several reasons, but primarily with the security issue in Congo. I think once, and I'm hopeful that it will. Security will return and it will be more politically stable that we'd be able to accept guests. Right now, the government isn't allowing travel to North Kivu, Ituri, and one other province, and we're located in Ituri and Oriental province. And so visitors aren't even allowed in the province right now. And it's even quite difficult for our own staff from the U.S. to get visas. So at the time, we don't have any opportunities on the ground, but I know everyone wants to see an Okapi. Although I've been there several times and I've never seen an Okapi in the wild.
Yep.
But I would recommend talking about Okapi or contributing to our project. Or we also will encourage people to visit zoos because zoos are about a third of our funding, and a lot of their conservation funding comes from visiting zoos.
Hmm.
Or from admissions, guest admissions.
Right.
And so when you buy a ticket to a zoo, a portion of that ticket will go to their conservation fund. We'll receive a portion of the funds from the conservation fund. If they have an opportunity to choose a project to support, I always recommend choosing Okapi, but I'm selfish. But so that's what we usually recommend for people to be involved. I wish I could provide more. I want to provide more, particularly with on-site visits, but it's just not the case
Of
that we
course.
can deal with at this point.
So because we're not able to directly be involved, what might you recommend listeners learn? Like, what skill sets would be valuable to an organization similar to the Okapi Conservation Project, or
Any conservation project.
right?
Yeah,
What would you recommend from your
if
own
they want to get into the
experience?
conservation
Right,
field. Okay.
right.
Every conservation organization needs funding. And so if you have any development or fundraising skills, 100%, that's fantastic. Grant writing, oof, I hate writing grants, but it's a necessary evil. They take a lot of time. Um, but being able to speak with people and solicit and ask for their individual support, usually with individual donors or individual contributors, supporters, though that funding is generally unrestricted, and that
Mm,
means it's not specifically tied to a specific project. So you can use it to help pay salaries or pay your electric bill or pay for fuel or whatever it is. So generally, all nonprofits, not just conservation nonprofits, prefer unrestricted funding, and that generally comes from individual donors. So if you can be a personable person and bring that unrestricted and meet with donors and bring that unrestricted funding to a conservation project, that is fantastic. That's key. That's gold. If you're a marketing person, if you're able to take complex science words and jargon from all of the researchers that are so deep in their work and use all these big words, if you can distill that down into an easier message that's more digestible for maybe children or young adults or a different audience that might not have that science background. Science communicators are needed. Being able to design an unbiased research project, if you want to go down the research route, conservation is not conservation and research I see are two different things, but conservation can't happen without research. You can't understand the problem that you're addressing without appropriate, unbiased research and understanding how you're affecting your programs, your evaluation and monitoring. So if you can do evaluation and monitoring on the research side of things, I think that would be a fantastic skill. And I think one of the big ones that kind of goes with research and monitoring is, and kind of a little bit of conservation, is behavior change. I think behavior change is the future of conservation. That's my own personal perspective.
mhm.
I see a lot of behavior change programs being implemented by conservation organizations. And earlier in the interview, I said conservation is about people, not wildlife. And that's where that comes from, the idea of behavior change, because being
Right.
able to change people's behavior to at least understand or know what their impact is doing or what they're doing and what impact their actions have. Whether or not they change their behavior is a different thing, but that's what we want to get them to do. I think behavior change skills and that behavior change route is the future of conservation and any successful conservation program. That was a
Awesome.
lot of skills that I threw
Yeah,
at you, but
just
hopefully it gives
everything.
people some options.
Learn how to
Yes,
do anything, and
yes.
a conservation organization will want
I
that skill.
I think soft skills are critical. And I think all employers are leaning nowadays, even in like the business side, are leaning a lot towards soft skills, your ability to work with and get along with people and collaborate. It's all about collaboration, which is fantastic. I think it people skills, and that's
Right.
a really critical soft skill, is being able to communicate with people or talk with people and really get to understand how they're thinking. I think that would be really, really successful in the conservation field. And I think that leads into behavior change and all that stuff because conservation is about people, not
Right.
animals.
So now that we've opened that door, I want to
Mhm.
go ahead and start diving into a little bit about your own conservation background and how you got into the role that you're in, very
Okay.
briefly, because I don't want to hold you too long.
Yeah.
But so some of the questions that I'd like to ask people are like, what is your favorite thing to see in nature, and what would you like to see the most in person? For you,
Okay.
Okapi, right?
Ooh. Well, yeah, that would be the one thing that I definitely want to see in person is a wild okapi.
Right.
Even John Lucas, the founder of the project, and one of the founders of the project in 1987, over 37 years ago, he has never seen a wild okapi. Very few of our staff have seen wild okapi too. So, and I have never seen one. I've only ever seen them in zoos. So I would love to see a wild okapi one day. But what I love to see in nature right now is birds and plants. I'm a big bird person and I'm a big plant person. And whenever I go on vacation to a new place or even a new state, the first thing I notice is the difference in plants and the difference in bird song. And so I'm always looking to try and identify. And I have tons of bird feeders in my backyard. I live, my backyard is adjacent to a few acres of woods. I wouldn't call it a forest because there's some invasive plants in there, but it's woods
Right.
in between the neighborhood. But we have so much wildlife that comes out, and I love just watching all of the birds and just being outside and listening to birds, insects, trees. I've always been one to be in nature.
Awesome. I think a lot of us who are pursuing conservation goals are kind of
Yeah,
like that.
for sure.
So, how did you move into the field of conservation? And then, I guess the follow up being like, how did you get involved with the Okapi Conservation
Sure.
Project?
I'll kind of link both of those
Yeah,
into a relatively um,
coherent, right?
coherent synopsis of my history. So, my degree's in biology and marine science. I've always wanted
Okay,
to do something with animals. About three-quarters of the way through school, I was really involved in all of these programs. I had several jobs at the university, and I was just very involved in student life. I was in Greek life. I was doing everything. Everyone knew my name. I was always late to class because I was too busy talking to people. I became a people person. I used to be really shy. And so, because I was so involved, I wanted to go to higher education administration. And so, my first job out, and I had my sights set on a master's in higher education administration. And then I started working in the development department at my university. And so, I developed those fundraising skills. But at that time, I decided I missed my animals. I missed being around animals all the time. I loved people, but I missed being around animals. And so then I applied for a job, several jobs at the zoo locally, didn't get them until I got a call back for the third one on a fundraising position at the zoo. I'm like, okay, I can do this. Just transfer my fundraising skills. I'm much closer to the animals. First day on the job, I said, I want to work in conservation. How do I get this? Is a stepping stone position. It was an entry level fundraising position. So they knew I wasn't going to be there forever. And so
And
they
which
got me
zoo was
connected.
that?
Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens.
Jacksonville. Okay,
And that is where I met John Lucas. And so I eventually held a position in marketing and public relations. So I planned all the zoo events, zoo lights, spooktacular, all the events and everything, fundraising events. And then I eventually made my way over to conservation where I met John Lucas. And so I worked for him part time with focusing on the zoo's conservation program and Okapi Conservation Project. And so I had kind of a split role. And then in August 20, or no, in April of 2021, I replaced the zoo portion of the job with sea turtles. So I have been volunteering with sea turtles for the past 14 years, even when I was working at my university in the fundraising department. That's when I started volunteering with sea turtles. So now I kind of have a joint sea turtle and Okapi position where I do a lot of the U.S. operational work for Okapi, and then I lead a group of 48 volunteers that do sea turtle nest monitoring in St. Johns County, Florida during the sea turtle nesting season.
maybe I'll have to grab you back on to talk about that side of your life
I
because
can talk about sea turtles all day too.
you are just very busy. It sounds like all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Tell me about it.
as someone who moved into the conservation realm from that fundraising perspective that you're still doing
Mhm.
to a
Yeah.
great extent, what was the biggest challenge that you had to get used to when you started working with the Okapi Conservation Project? Not
I
just
think
full
the
time,
biggest
but
I'd say the biggest challenge, and it is still a challenge because it's definitely a learning curve, and it's something that I think has benefited me tremendously, is working with working across cultures because the culture in Congo, in DR Congo, is very unique. It's very different from the United States. And my counterpart, Bear Safwanza, who is about my age and he's the second in charge of the project over there. We are always going back and forth on like cultural differences and like, oh my God, that makes so much sense on why that is that way, or like, why the heck do you do it this way? This doesn't make any sense. So I think understanding and being respectful of those cultural differences has really broadened my understanding, experience, and respect for different people. Listening, being more of a listener than a, I mean, I'm talking a lot on this thing, but being more of a listener than a
obviously.
talker when I'm meeting new people, and really trying to understand them as a person and where they're coming from, because we're constantly thinking and relating things back to our own personal experiences, so that will impact ways that we make decisions. So in a professional manner, understanding how to work with different cultures has been incredibly beneficial for me. I think, but it has been the biggest challenge too, kind of working through those differences, language difficulties, and things being lost in translation because the primary language, if you go to school in Congo, the language you learn is French, but everyone speaks different dialects of Swahili. There's also Lingala, which is in the northeastern part of the reserve. I speak broken French. And so when I'm speaking with our staff, there's a little bit of we primarily communicate in English, but I try and do it in French when, when I can. But when I go to Congo, I can fit in the meetings that we're having in French and I fully understand what's going on. I'm a little bit slower in participating. So language has been a little bit of a challenge, and time zones. Oh my gosh, I've gotten pretty good at time zones now in understanding where people are in the world, which I think is, it's quite interesting when I talk to people who work in the US and they don't have to deal with different time zones. And the first time that they have to deal with communicating with someone in a different time zone, it's like it's totally crazy to them, but I'm like, hey, I we got this, we got this. But I think it's a lot of the challenges have been working across cultures, language barriers, and time zones. But I think it's been a learning process and working through all of them, and I think it has really helped me grow as a person and as a professional.
Yeah, that sounds like perfectly reasonable challenges to have. I mean,
Yes,
I, I've done some work with people in Japan and Germany, and trying to set up meetings and have conversations can be
yes,
an adventure. So
yes.
as you've walked deeper and deeper into the conservation world, tell
Mhm.
me about like maybe two memories that you either like, dislike. Like, what are two of the most memorable moments that you've had, either with the Okapi Conservation Project or doing sea turtles or,
Okay. Well,
any
I
of
feel
the
like I
other
have to choose
things?
one with Okapi because this is an Okapi call.
Yeah, but this
Um,
is about you.
I think, well, I mean, I have some, it, I have several experiences in Congo that are unique experiences that I don't know if I would necessarily say I enjoyed them, but I
Mm,
think the, one of the most memorable and exciting experiences was my most recent trip to Congo, which was January of 23. I'm hoping to go back later this year. We alter on the US side, we alternate who goes over depending on what needs we have. And so I went in January of 23. And when I stepped off of that plane, I was greeted with the entire town of Apulu. And the women's group were singing their song, and it was just loud and cheerful, and everyone was clapping. And the indigenous Mbuti were doing a ceremonial dance as part of the welcome. And so when I walked off that plane, I felt like super cool. And I'm like, is this real life? This is not actually happening. And of course, I'm like taking pictures the whole time, but also just enjoying it, going down the line and shaking everyone's hands. It was really exciting. And I don't know, it was kind of like coming home, and it was feeling like a part of a family.
yeah.
So I would say that would be my most memorable on the Okapi side of things. Ooh, I think on the sea turtle side of things, there was one time where, so we don't work necessarily directly with the turtles, but we monitor the nests. And so when we find a nest in the morning, we'll mark it and then we'll check it every single day until it hatches. After it hatches, we go in 3 days later to do an evaluation to see how successful that nest was, how many hatched, how many didn't hatch. So
Right.
we will see hatchlings occasionally that are still in the chamber, but not too often. But I would say one time we went out to go do an evaluation where we were going to dig up a nest, and just maybe 20 feet from it was another nest that was emerging at the same time. So all of
Wow.
the babies came out at once. And that's a very, very rare occurrence to see because it usually happens at night.
Right.
But the temperature dropped just enough because they're temperature sensitive. They'll emerge when the temperature drops, signaling nightfall. And so we got to see 120 baby sea turtles coming out of the sand and going into the ocean for the first time. So that was pretty incredible.
That's pretty awesome. I'd love
Yeah.
to see that someday. So
Yes. Come to
my last,
Florida.
I might have to take you up on that at some point. So the last kind of out of left field question that I've got for you about
Mhm.
yourself and your work is if you had to pick a different conservation project other than sea turtles or okapi to either
Okay.
develop or work on. Yeah, I know I took the easy answer away. What would it be? If you could pick anything and you had a reasonable amount of funding and manpower, what would you like to work with? Or what project would you like to see come into the world?
That is so hard because there's so many species of animals that I love. And I want to choose one that I would really love and something that's really unique or threatened. I will say that I would. So my wife and I like to go on a big vacation every year. This
Okay.
has a little bit of a backstory. And so this year we just went to New Zealand and I fell in love with the birds. Obviously, I said I'm a bird person. And so I had, and one of the birds that I really wanted to see that I could not see because you have to have special permits in order to go on to the few islands that they are is the kakapo,
Ah,
which is a ground parrot that's only
yes.
found on a few islands off the coast of New Zealand. And so I think I would want to work with the Kakapo Project, the people that are, and maybe the Department of Conservation at New Zealand to help with the kakapos. I think there's just such a cool bird.
Awesome. That's definitely a species that is another one of those you might know the word of them, but you've never really like sat
Yes,
down and learned it.
exactly,
So we found
exactly.
your type of species that you really
Yes,
are
yes.
into.
Well, sea turtles not so much. Everyone knows what a sea turtle is, and so it is a little bit of a disparity when I talk about an okapi, which no one knows about, or when I'm talking about sea turtles, which everyone knows about.
Not everyone thinks they know about. There's a lot to sea turtles.
Yes, there are. There are.
So as we come to kind of the end of the conversation, the podcast, I want to let you have a chance to shout out your organization's contact information,
Mhm.
anything else that you feel is important for our listeners to know, and just
Cool.
anything else.
If anyone wants to learn more about Okapi and our work, Okapi Conservation Project, or our staff, or our 3 pillars of wildlife protection, community assistance, or conservation education and awareness, you can visit us on our website at www.okapiconservation.org. That's OKAPI. You can email us at info@okapiconservation.org. You can find us on Facebook at Okapi Conservation Project or on Instagram with our Instagram handle at Okapi Conservation. This has been a really fun interview. I always enjoy talking about Okapi. I think I mean, I said one of our biggest hurdles is just teaching people about Okapi and that they exist, and doing podcasts like these or interviews like these really help convey that message and live one of our missions and one of our help address one of our challenges. So it's always a pleasure to get on and talk a little bit about Okapi, and I appreciate everyone for listening.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, and we'll make sure that all of those links are in the show notes for anybody who wants to reach out. Thanks
Excellent.
again. Take care, Lucas.
Thanks so much, Stephen. You too.
Thanks again to Lucas with the Okapi Conservation Project for taking time to speak with us today. I'm glad that we were able to talk with them about their work with Okapi. If you're interested in reaching out to the OCP, you can do so via email at info@okapiconservation.org, or the website www.okapiconservation.org. If you'd like to learn more about the Okapi and the work being done with them, I've put links to the IUCN's Conservation Strategy and Status Review and the Okapi Conservation Project's 2022 Annual Report in the show notes. If you'd like to know about upcoming episodes and give suggestions for guest questions, please check our website or Discord server. Additionally, if you have other organizations you've worked with and or would like to hear us speak to, you can contact us either at our email or website or on the Discord server. Links to all of these are going to be in the show notes. Have a good week, and I look forward to speaking with you next time and developing more eco-connections.